What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm absolutely honored to have back on the show for a second time United Church minister turned whistleblower, Canadian hero, loving father, published writer and author, public speaker and podcaster, documentary filmmaker, Nobel Peace Prize nominee, co-founder of the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State, righteous soul, and ego-strong voice, Kevin Annett. In case you missed Kevin's first episode, or if you're new here, here is a brief recap of Kevin's testimony and what we talked about last time. Kevin, a former United Church minister turned fearless whistleblower, stands as a Canadian hero in the relentless pursuit of truth and justice. For decades, he's exposed the horrific genocide of Indigenous children in church-run Indian residential schools, uncovering a dark campaign of abuse, murder, and cultural annihilation with a staggering 50% death rate. At great personal cost, his career, his family, and his reputation, Kevin sparked a global movement, becoming a beacon for survivors and a thorn in the side of the powerful. In the 1990s, his discoveries in Port Alberni, British Columbia, shattered his world and ignited his mission. He convened the first independent tribunal into residential school crimes in 1998, founded the Truth Commission into genocide in Canada in 2000, authored Hidden from History, The Canadian Holocaust in 2001, and released the award-winning documentary Unrepentant in 2007. His work forced Canada's 2008 apology, though his name was erased from the narrative. Undaunted, Kevin co-founded the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State in 2010, uniting survivors across 26 countries. His efforts led to the 2011 excavation of children's bones in Brantford, Ontario, and the 2012 prosecution of Pope Benedict, contributing to the pontiff's historic resignation. Despite blacklisting, smear campaigns, and state persecution, including a fraudulent 2001 COVID order targeting him, Kevin persisted. He's authored over a dozen books, founded the Republic of Canada in 2015, and earned 2 Nobel Peace Prize nominations. Today, Kevin's unyielding voice inspires millions to confront genocide, child trafficking, and oppression, proving one person's courage can change the world. In Kevin's gripping first episode we recently did together, we explored his extraordinary journey, a courageous stand against the corrupt collusion of church and state in concealing Canada's genocide of Indigenous children. His revelations unveiled a chilling web of power that legalized and hid generational genocide, exposing truths that shook the foundation of those in control. We delved into the fierce backlash Kevin faced, retaliation from those profiting off secrecy, and the commodification of innocent lives. His story is a powerful testament into the steep price of whistleblowing, showcasing the sacrifices true heroes make to uphold justice. Today, Kevin returns to continue his riveting saga as a relentless whistleblower and advocate. Today, we're going to be diving deep into fresh evidence of these heinous crimes, explore how to prosecute and halt them through independent jurisdictions, and discuss the transformative potential of common law courts, sovereign republics, and personal sovereignty. Kevin will share more of his harrowing experiences, offer insights from his incredible book, Whistleblower's Manual, and inspire with his unwavering resolve. Kevin's relentless fight empowers a global movement to end genocide, child trafficking, and systemic oppression. A single, unbreakable, and unyielding voice rising above the darkness, sparking a revolution of truth and justice that will not be silenced, no matter the cost. Before wrapping up the introduction of today's guest, I'd like to share just a couple quick reminders and updates. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, if you wanted to share any information privately with me, or if you were interested in submitting a written testimony for my upcoming book series or to be featured on a Substack article, you can reach out to me via email at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com or standbysurvivors@protonmail.com. Additionally, I've teamed up with a couple of my favorite brands to offer you guys exclusive discount codes on products I personally love, such as Rife Technology frequency machines and CZTL's premium methylene blue. You can find all the relevant links and codes along with other resources down in the show notes. Your support across all platforms is greatly appreciated, especially as I've had to shift to alternative streaming platforms such as Rumble and X following the termination of my former YouTube channel. I've just recently started a new YouTube channel, and you can subscribe to me there at the handle at Imagination Podcast Official that I will be and am currently rebuilding as well. And I'm almost done with uploading all my videos from my past 5 seasons. This transition to multiple platforms is crucial to continue sharing vital information with the public and disclosure communities. So thank you all wholeheartedly on the other side of the screen for helping to make the imagination the safest space on the internet for survivor, whistleblower, advocate, and educator disclosures. Your support means the absolute world to me and to every guest on the show. So, you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming back today's guest of honor, voice for the voiceless, relentless victim and survivor advocate, passionate purveyor of truth, content creator, absolute warrior, and a man whose actions speak louder than any words. The one, the only, Kevin Annett. Kevin, thank you so much for being here again with us today. It's an honor to have you back.
And it's an honor and a delight to be back. Thank you, Emma.
You're so welcome. The last episode we did was received so well. And as you know, through emails and correspondences, some people that watch my show were just so delighted to see you and couldn't speak highly enough about you, even feeling starstruck at getting to talk to you via email. So it's really amazing, how far your work has gone. And
Mm.
I'm sure for you, it's a really incredible feeling getting that type of feedback because like last time we talked about you've been so silenced for so long, and I'm sure that's made it hard for people to find you, for you to get outreach, and for you to really know the brevity of the work that you've done and how far it's spread into all the different countries and people that your work has touched. So it's really great to get to share all this knowledge and personal experience that you've learned over these last few decades. And I
Mm.
know today is going to be no different. If you guys missed the last episode, like I said, it'll be down in the show notes. Please go listen to it. It's an episode really focused on Kevin and his story. And today we're going to dive deep into some topics that Kevin has really specialized in learning about and being able to educate really articulately on over the past few decades. These are also topics that he has some books that we're going to reference as well that you guys can learn more about it. But Kevin, I thought maybe we'd start. I know you have some updates, and I wanted to hand it over to you to maybe kick off the show sharing those, and then we can dive into these other topics that we have planned out for today.
Okay, Emma, that's a good idea. The updates have to do with things that have been in the news recently, and it has to do with the guilt of the present Pope, um, Robert Prevost. He calls himself Leo, Pope Leo, um, having to do with this heinous cult called the Ninth Circle, which operates really all over the world, but especially in Rome. We've had new eyewitnesses come forward who saw him at ceremonies where children were killed, um, with previous popes like John Paul II, the Polish Pope Karol Wojtyla. And these eyewitnesses describe a whole range of other activities. Now, this is part of the whole campaign we've done for many years, as you know. And one of the things that's come out of that is the power of our common law courts, because it was a common law court in 2013 that forced Pope Benedict out of office, Joseph Ratzinger. And it shows that when people form their own investigations in courts, when the existing courts and governments are compromised because of their connection to these crimes, we have the power to establish our own investigations, bring in our own verdicts, and even perform citizen arrests on people who we know are harming children. That activates the police and others to take action as well. So, the honest elements within the police to realize they've got to do something about this, right? So it has a tremendous impact. And because of that, we've convened as of last Monday, a new court was convened in Europe. I did a conference call with the judges and the prosecutor. They'll be starting the case on September 1st, laying charges, issuing subpoenas to the present Pope to answer charges from these eyewitnesses. They've even found material in the secret Vatican archives describing, going back to the year 1870, a list of all the participants in these cult rituals. It's in Latin in that, but Prevost's name is on it, along with all the other previous popes. So this is very big, and it's going to be another big campaign starting up in the fall. But as part of that, what I am emphasizing to people more and more now is you can't really take these actions personally unless you've recovered a certain amount of your own sovereignty. Recovered your mind, your ability to act, to challenge the status quo. But in a bigger sense, you also need political and spiritual sovereignty, right? To set up your own courts, your own systems of governance where we stand outside the existing system. Otherwise, you can't prosecute these crimes. You rely on the government and the court system that's really tied in and complicit in these crimes. So you got to go with your own jurisdiction. And that's the works we're going to talk about today kind of help with that. Not only this general book on personal, political, spiritual sovereignty, which came out recently, but this one that came out 10 years ago, that you referred to, a handbook for whistleblowers and truth tellers. And there's a lot of rich content there based on not stuff just popped out of my mind, but based on real experience a lot of people have had. And how you navigate things like smear campaigns, the usual things they go to do to whistleblowers, like going after their family, like they did mine, destroying your ability to have a livelihood, starting the whisper and smear campaign all over the internet about somebody. All of that, there's very effective ways to counter it. And so we go into that in detail, and we find it's for people who are willing to take the step beyond talk to action. This is indispensable, just like the common law court manual that tells you how to set up these courts. So that's kind of in a nutshell, leading into today, right?
Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing up that update. I think we're so bombarded sometimes some of this type of news that does mention ritual abuse or satanic ritual abuse of any kind. It might make
Yeah.
a headline and then get buried and then we're bombarded. So I really appreciate you filling us in on that, especially because on this podcast in particular, I have actually had multiple survivors of these satanic cults that sort of operate at these higher levels, politically, socially, economically, in
Yeah.
different countries who have testified on my podcast, satanic or ritual abuse happening at the Vatican or at the tunnels underneath it. And so I 100% believe these stories and know that, a lot of this stuff really does go up to these really high levels.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll be very interesting watching these stories sort of, come out and help hopefully formulate a narrative that can be presented to a court with multiple eyewitnesses and corroboration. And it's really great that you're helping champion that, in the ways that you are and that you're able to speak on that. And maybe we could do actually an episode on just that topic. I think it would be really good to help share that since, like I said, it's not something that's should be front page news everywhere, right? That's a pretty big deal. And I'm sure a lot of people listening don't even know that it even cracked a headline.
Right. Well, I mean, and it's again, it always goes back to basic questions of you know how legitimate something is, right? And like there's the old saying, power always rests on legitimacy. So you can have all the power you want in the world, but if like a ruler, um, if they're not legitimate in the eyes of the public, their power gradually just goes and disintegrates, right? So we find that when you're doing this work, you got to point to concrete things. And a good example of that was early on. I remember I went to MIT in Boston, and Noam Chomsky. He's a scholar, kind of an activist going back to the '60s, and he told me we were sitting around talking in the faculty club there, and he said I was telling him about all those smear campaigns against me and everything. He said, "Oh yeah, the FBI used to say that I was doing drugs and having sex with grad students, right, to kind of delegitimate me, right?" And I said, "So what did you do?" He said, "Well, I said to the interviewer, show me the evidence, right? Show me the evidence I was doing this." And he knows, of course, that in the smear campaign, there never is evidence. It's rumor. Because like in a court of law, I did a year of law in Vancouver. And in legal process class, they tell you that when you're in court, if the evidence is on the side of your client, you always argue the evidence. But if you don't have any evidence, you attack the credibility of the witness, right? And when you step back and look at, I mean, you see this on TV shows and everything all the time and in movies, but when you step back and look at the last 30 years and what's gone on, the big picture, Canada and its churches and the Vatican and the Crown and all these powers we've indicted, right, and proved guilty, they've never provided any counter evidence. Not once. They've never sued me, and they've never said, "Oh yeah, he's wrong. Here, look at this." They just attack my credibility. They just attack me. Now that means they have no evidence. They're guilty, and they're just trying to get people to be afraid. There was an RCMP operative called Peter Montague who led the black ops against me. And he said to somebody in 1998 when we did our first tribunal in these residential school crimes, he said, take down Annett and you take down the issue. And that's right, because you equate somebody with an issue. Therefore, if you destroy their credibility, nobody will look at the issue anymore. And they're so afraid of the name Kevin Annett that they don't want to hear about residential schools and genocide now. So that's a very effective way the state or the church or anyone torpedoes an oppositionist. And we deal with that in this book. We say, okay, here's a way to counter it. Your enemies will use what I call the 3 Ds: deny, distract, and discredit. So first, and they did that in the crimes of genocide in Canada. First, they denied it. No, never happened. But then as we introduced the evidence, they realized they've got to distract. So they began talking about, oh yeah, there were children that went missing, but not that many, just kind of distract. And then discredit. They started working in the background, starting a campaign. Did you know that Kevin Annett rips off money from Native people? And you can't, it's like a virus. A rumor can never be traced once it's out there, but it goes exponentially everywhere. And Black Op, I remember reading this during the Watergate hearing in the 70s, where all the first revelations about black operations by people in government first began to come out. And the Nixon campaign to torpedo McGovern in the 1972 election, what they did is they hired people to go into elevators, 2 guys, and in a crowded elevator, they'd start saying, yeah, I hear McGovern uses drugs. He's a bad drug addict. Yeah, really? So 10 people in the elevator hear something like that. Within an hour, 500 people know it, right? This is before the internet. This is before, and those grassroots way of discrediting some, suddenly the rumor is out there. No one knows where it came from. But it becomes common knowledge in the sense that if you say something more than 6 times, the deep memory takes it in. That's why if you notice in commercials for any product, they say the name of the product at least 6 times. Just watch in the next commercial, because it goes from short-term to long-term memory, and then it's in there and people all believe it. So belief is like, belief isn't necessarily true, but it's what everyone accepts. Like, Catholics believe that God is in a communion wafer, right? Jesus is literally in the communion wafer. I mean, that's just silly, but enough people believe it and it becomes true, right? So, right. So that's part of it. Right?
100%. And the book that you're referring to can be found on your website, and there's links directly that will link to Amazon, I believe is the storefront that you operate from with that. Um, while we're on that topic, I wanted to ask you a little bit about sort of navigating the smear campaigns, because I know this comes up a lot in your own personal story,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sure a lot of people listening who have been speaking out about their own story or helping advocate for victims like you as somebody that's giving them a voice, they're also going through the alienation and, smear campaigning from people. So I wanted to get your insights on how you navigate that, because I think that's a really great point that you make in your book.
Well, yeah, and it's a big focus because we've had so much experience fighting it, right? Um, First of all, I say to people, you never circulate rumors. If you hear somebody about something about somebody, you go to them and talk to them about it. You don't repeat it, and you don't, because it's all based on hearsay and rumor. But even more fundamentally, the only really good way to, or effective way to counter a smear campaign is with hard evidence. And, you say, oh yeah, well, the issue isn't Kevin Annett at all. It's the fact that here's a record showing half the children were dying every year in these so-called Indian schools. Why were they dying? They were taking the healthy, sticking them in with the sick, and locking the door and never treating them. And then they can blame it as an act of nature, right? And this is admitted by government doctors, by the church itself, and all these documents. So I say, read the evidence, look at the evidence, not at me. And then that's become the issue, because you see, they're always trying to, like lawyers have a term, redirect. If your client is being really damaged by something, you redirect the whole issue into something else, like the credibility of the witness or something else. So they were always trying to redirect the church and the state. Instead of talking about murder by decree, they talked about all the Native people who are being ripped off by Kevin Annett. I mean, Okay, like who? They never came forward with anyone. I actually posted on my website a really good article by a journalist, Sarah Webster, and she talks about the anatomy of a character assassination. And all these people she interviewed who had this native guy, Dennis Tallio, who admitted he'd been approached by the RCMP right after a first tribunal and paid to start circulating rumors that Kevin was ripping off native people. Now, how I rip off homeless, impoverished people is something, like they don't have a lot of money, right? So how could I be ripping them off financially? And yet nobody goes from one step A to step B to kind of logically try to think about that. Because Hitler said in Mein Kampf, how fortunate for rulers that the people do not think. Human beings feel before they think. And that's true. That's very accurate. We go on feeling and emotion, and we're not taught to think critically, in school. I mean, the opposite. You're taught to be a herd, and so people are easily gullible in that sense, right? And at the same time, they go through that, and it's all about persistence, because if you persist long enough, you begin to learn these things. And that's why a smear campaign actually helps you over the long run, because it's designed to take you out quick and destroy all the people and support around you so that you're ineffective. But if you persist long enough, like people often say about me now, well, how could he be a con artist if he's still at it for 30 years and he's lost everything, and everything he said has been proven true? I mean, come on, guys. And then you start questioning the people who are smearing me, like, what's their motive? Where are they coming from? So it actually, if you can endure it, it actually helps you over the long run. And we go into detail about that, about, kind of the nuts and bolts of how to turn the tables on the people doing that to you, right?
Yes, and I think it's just amazing that you have overcome so much because, like I said in the intro and how you detailed and outlined in the last episode, you literally did lose everything, from family to reputation and everything in between. And it's great that you're able to come through that
Mm.
and through so much devastation and so much attack on your life and every single thing that was around you, and that you're able to have sort of this purpose through it. Obviously, in your mission, it's made you more resilient, but you're able to now see the ways that maybe it helped you in ways that it can help other people, because that probably is the hardest, barrier with whistleblowers is withstanding that, because that
Yeah.
is so powerful, having things like your finances and your family and children and a smear campaign, having all these things coming against you. It's really easy to retreat and say, okay, I'm done, I don't want to do this anymore. Is this what this is going to be like? But it isn't always like that. And eventually, like you said, that the conversation starts to change, where then the people that start being questioned aren't the people speaking the truth like you, it's the
Mm.
people opposing you of,
Yeah.
well, if this person is so wrong, like you said, how and why are they still going? What's their motive? You said it was for attention, or they wanted to get money, or they were doing it for this. They haven't gotten any of that, except maybe some bad attention here and there. They've had all their money taken away. He
Yeah.
clearly has to have something else that a different reason. Maybe I should go look into this and then question the people coming after him.
That's right. And, like this book was written for whistleblowers, i.e., people who are still in the system, wondering if, like, for example, you work for a big company and you find that there's criminal activity going on, but you're going to lose your job, or worse, if you start talking about it. And so I had to go through, strip back all sorts of layers of illusion. I didn't just come to this right away. The old saying is, your best teacher is your last mistake. And if you have the humility to learn from your mistakes, you can grow from it, and you avoid that problem. But when people are first in it, a big corporation or church or government uses fear. They threaten you right away. It's like bang, and then they offer you the glove, the velvet glove. They say, "Okay, we're going to hammer you, but if you play along, you can." They give you an offer, right? And like I was in the United Church, they came to me, fired me like that after I had written these letters about these crimes of the church and land theft, theft of native land by the church's corporate partners and all that. And they came to me and said, okay, you can stay as a minister. You have 2 children to support. We know that. But you have to agree to psychiatric evaluation and retraining for a year without pay. Well, I mean, that's pretty extreme, there's no basis to ask for it. I asked them, what's the basis for you to say I need a psychiatric exam? And they didn't ever give any basis. But I was to step into that and frame myself as somebody who was unbalanced. And therefore, everything I had been saying lost its credibility. They were expecting me to put the noose around my neck and hang myself. But when I wouldn't do that, then the boot came down more. And they used more extreme measures, like, they immediately went to my wife and said, we'll help you with your divorce if you leave him. We'll help pay, which they did subsequently. So I lost my children. But that's all designed to hammer you so you just collapse, crawl away, and die somewhere. And a lot of people that they never get further than that. But if you do persist, then the next step they do, it's really fascinating how they do this, because they did it with me. They offer to negotiate. They say, okay, let's negotiate our differences. But all that's designed to do is buy them time. Because when you've exposed all this crime, they got to get rid of the witnesses. They got to hide the evidence. They need time to do that. So they feign that they want to interest in working out your differences. So they negotiated with me for like about 4 months and getting all their ducks in order in the background. And we just ran in circles. And eventually they decided to throw me out anyway, but it was designed to extend it and feed on my illusions that, like, we all believe, well, the system has some good people in it. Maybe we can kind of maneuver and bring justice, And then I realized after a while, no, this is big money. These are big institutions. They want me gone. They want me dead, right? And so they've got to ensure that. And the way they did is they dragged it out. Finally, the end of negotiations, they tossed me out. The only public defrocking of a minister in United Church history. They made a public show trial to put me on, like, as an example of this will happen to you. Because right at that same time in 1996, the first news stories were breaking of these deaths of children in residential schools, thanks to people who I was working with. We just made it all public. So they had to get me out quick and then blacken my name. And that's when the smear campaign began too. So they go through steps. And that's what I say. We often in these books quote Sun Tzu, the Chinese general from 3,000 years ago. He wrote a book called The Art of War. And it's a brilliant book if you're a small group fighting a bigger group, because it says your enemy is always much bigger than you, but you can use that to your advantage. You can use their strength against them. A big institution can only react in certain ways. They've got a set protocol, and you can maneuver around that all the time, which I did. You've got to, like a guerrilla army, like how the Americans lost in Vietnam. They were thinking in conventional, World War II terms. You go in and blast people apart with your air power. And the Vietnamese were thinking like Sun Tzu. You maneuver around that on the ground, and you use those strengths against them. And we did that successfully in Canada, right? We struck where they were weak. And that's, you never hit a big enemy where they're strong, but where they're weak. Where they're vulnerable is in their money and their public image. So we started to go into churches on Sunday morning and talk about this. Churches freaked out. I remember the first time we did that, I got a frantic call from a church, Catholic church lawyer, saying, please don't have another occupation of our church. It's Easter. Please, what do you want? And I said, no, we want you to disclose where you buried all these children. And he hung up on me. But it was that level of desperation, right? And then soon after the government stepped in to save the churches by starting this so-called apology process, which was just a huge cover-up. But it was all sparked by a few of us not determined not to give up and knowing your enemy. Like, that's what Sun Tzu says. Whoever knows the enemy and knows themselves will win every battle, no matter how small you are. And the other way to win any battle, he said, is you establish the ground. He called it the terrain of battle. You define the issue and you keep sticking to it. Like back then, I was the only person using the word genocide about Indian residential schools. Now everybody's using it, including the Prime Minister and the Pope. They all acknowledge genocide. Well, that's because we define the terrain of battle not as, the issue is not one of children being occasionally harmed. The issue is a whole culture trying to wipe out another culture and going after the children to do it, right? Genocide. And they eventually came around to that because we established the terrain. Never do what your opponent wants you to do. Never use their language. Never go onto their terrain, or you've lost already. And that's when people say, when we want to expose an issue, we have a protest. Well, a protest is another way of asking for something, right? We don't ask for anything. We establish the justice. We go after them, and we create our own courts, and we say publicly, you guys are guilty of these crimes. We don't wait for them at all. And that's keeping what Sun Tzu calls it the chi, which is the essential energy of a situation. And that idea of chi runs through this book, this manual, which is the example he uses is, how does a squirrel cross a river on a log? Okay, he's able to do that not because of any of those three, but only their temporary combination. Temporarily, he rides a log across the river. He said life is like that. It's in continual flux and change. And if you're able to master at any moment those forces and strike at the right moment, you won. And we did that. All these things came together for us, and we knew when to act. And that's what won it, even though we were at best 24 people across the country. Yet we forced out this change from people to institutions that did not want to admit their crime. So those are the things you learn on the ground, and that's what we've tried to kind of summarize in that book.
And if it's okay, I want to pick your brain on just a couple more topics on this. I really want to
Yeah.
encourage people to buy this book because you do go so much deeper into anything that, we could cover just in even one episode.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is so important from the point of somebody actually disclosing and then facing that obstacle head on,
Yeah.
in the process, like you did. But also, you mentioned something really important that those obstacles, if people know that they're going to happen in advance, such as at an institution, maybe at a church that they belong to, maybe their child at school, maybe how they're viewed in society, people tend to stop before they even take action because that gets scary for them. So, one thing I wanted to ask you about that you cover in your book is you actually refer to whistleblowing as a spiritual and moral act. And in the book, you talk about your dark nights of the soul and overcoming those spiritual and moral standards and sort of expectations of being a human and doing the right thing. And I wanted to just sort of pick your brain on that about the spiritual and morality of part of this, and how you found the strength to endure the isolation and persecution that you got, and then maybe if you could offer some words to encouragement of that person that is sitting there because they're too scared to go forward.
Well, the isolation and persecution helped because it stripped away all my other preoccupations. Like the good aspect of losing my children is I didn't have that responsibility every day, and I could go down and work with these folks. So you see, there's a golden lining in everything. You just got to be able to see it. I think somebody once said that pain is our best teacher once we make it our ally and are not afraid of it. Pain is the most clarifying thing there is, but we're burdened by it. And don't forget too, we're all raised in a culture of dependency. First on parents, then on teachers, then on bosses, and you always think that somebody else knows better than you. And if you just play the game, you'll be taken care of by life. You'll have your pension, you can have your vacation when you're retired, and all that, right? It's the big myth that keeps people in chains, in mental chains, right? But the clarifying act of being persecuted is suddenly the chains go boom, they're off. And like in the Matrix movie, people try to get back in the matrix, right, into the illusion because they're scared outside it, right, because they're so used to it. But it's a liberating act to be attacked, and you have to have a few people around you who recognize that and can encourage you in it, which is one of the reasons I wrote the book, the manual, to be that for people. But I would also say that it's also a test of character of who we are. Not everybody can do this. Some people are almost pre-adapted to do this. And I know when I was a little boy, all I ever did was play war. I had my dad's U.S. Army helmet on, and I was always not just war for violence. That really wasn't what I was doing. It was, I organized all the kids on the block to be in squads, and we would kind of patrol around and kind of, do stuff together, that kind of camaraderie. But also I realized, for whatever reason, I was being prepared all through my life for this work. And tales of how people endure under fire, of heroism, it always attracted me in life. And I always realized that if you do the right thing, eventually you're going to have to be tested, your courage and everything. So it's partly our background, how we're raised, and the things we go through, right? I do think people are set aside to do this work. So that's another thing. But if you're not, you nevertheless have a great advantage over the people persecuting you. And that is, you have a truth that they're afraid of, right? And that gives you power over them, right? That makes you stronger than them because they're reacting defensively all the time. And people who react defensively in a state of fear, and they're more afraid of you than you are of them, frankly. They have a lot more to lose. They have millions of dollars to lose. What do you have to lose? Especially if you've lost your job and everything already, you got nothing to lose. That's why. That's why when we started doing the church occupations, I would say 90% of the people or more were homeless natives. Because, these folks would say, look, the cops beat me up every day. What am I afraid of these people? Let's go into the church. Whereas some of the more, as people with more to lose, a lot of the middle-class white people or whoever said, well, wait a minute, we might get in trouble if we go into that church. We might get arrested, right? And you saw that, but it was that 90% of people who were fearless because they had nothing to lose who led the rest of them in. We had a lot more people following us once those folks broke the ice. Those of us who knew, we not just thought, but we knew we had nothing to lose, right? And we can lead the rest like a veterans do in a battle. They lead the green recruits, and the green recruits become veterans once they go through the experience. So it's a constantly changing process, but that's why Sun Tzu in The Art of War says there's never any final outcome in any fight. There's something you learn for the next fight, right? You never lose, you never win. In a way, it's just life. It's that constantly changing mosaic, and you can navigate it. The key is to know how to navigate it on your terms, not on their terms.
Thank you for sharing about that. I think it's a testament to you that you were able to overcome that, like you said, whatever it was in your life that afforded you that fortitude to be able to push through that when so many other people stop before they even get started. But I
Mm-hmm.
also think there's a lot to learn in that. A hero never feels like a hero in the moment. When you're acting on something that's right, it's like going against everything else. It's the firefighter that is going into a burning building that everybody's running out of, right? You sort of are doing the opposite of what maybe feels heroic in that moment, in a sense, and then you're treated like the criminal, and then the criminals are sort of, heralded as being the heroes a lot of times and that's exactly why, like you said, they target people that are whistleblowing them so hard. You look at not only your own ability to withstand, but you look at these people have been attacking you for 30 years. Like it's on both ends, like the endurance, like why, if you're lying, like why would they be investing so much of their own time, money, all these different people to go after you, all these different ways that they've attacked you? So you see also how important this information is. And I think it can be very validating, like you said, to have some of these obstacles because it really shows on your side that if you weren't doing something great, these people wouldn't care about you. Why would they care about one man speaking out about these
Yeah.
things if what you're saying wasn't a threat to them, right?
Yeah, and exactly. And you talked about the moral aspect, the spiritual aspect of this. I mean, to me, it's always been just moral common sense. Children are being killed. Children are now being trafficked. They're being harmed. Why wouldn't you take this on? Like, well, that's what I don't understand when people hold back morally. How can they, right? And that is related to fear because I think fear is not really the issue. Fear is the issue is one of selfishness or selflessness. Because if you're a selfless personality and you're concerned about people out there and you're not really that concerned about yourself that much, right? Um, you're more courageous because you realize, look, if I don't act, what's going to happen to them? But if I'm always worried about myself, and we live in a very narcissistic, atomized, selfish culture where the first priority is always what's good for me in my life. If you're like that, of course you're going to be afraid. You're always afraid of something you might lose. And the system knows that. That's why they're always pressing those buttons. You could lose this, get your kid vaccinated or he might die, get an RRSP now, get a second mortgage, blah, blah, blah. All the time appealing to your greed, not fear, but that selfish urge in people to take care of yourself and shut out the world as if that's possible, right? And so I think it has to do with That's why Native people, another reason they jumped into this, because they're closer in time to the way we all used to be, which is we lived in more cooperative societies of extended families where everybody, like, I was raised in Winnipeg in a extended Scottish family. And in the clan system in Scotland, we were raised this way to think, don't worry about yourself, you'll be taken care of. Be concerned about the collective, the family, And I mean, that can have a bad connotation, like in the mafia or whatever, but in the extended family system, which we all grew out of, right? You all hold each other up, and you're raised to be selfless. You're raised to think of the good of the whole. And Indigenous people are closer in time to that. Like, we lost that centuries ago, but Native people knew intuitively, well, yeah, we better do this for those kids. Yeah, let's go, right? And so they were great allies, and that was a great advantage we had in this movement, to have people who were in touch with that spirit of helping each other, right? But without that, you're really disabled, because you're trying to appeal to people. Like on the Sean Atwood interviews I've been doing, I mean, we've had at one point 300,000 viewers. Out of that show, I got 4 email responses. That's 1 out of 100,000, right? And of those 4, none of them want to actually do anything. They just had questions. So I thought, where is everyone? Like, what is that? Is it just passive consumerism? Oh, good, I know something more now. I don't have to do anything else. Kevin's out there doing it for me, right? Um, so I mean, that's the biggest obstacle I find, not the police. I often say your enemy isn't the cop out there, it's the cop in your own head. The cop who's telling you to keep in line and not risk anything and don't worry, just that's that's the problem. So I think spiritually and morally, we have great resources as human beings right in our genes of what to do. We just have to draw on that and our natural disposition to help. Like, when you see an accident happen, everyone will rush over to help this person, right? And it's a beautiful moment when you see people, suddenly strangers, getting together to help somebody who's tripped, or an old woman with her stuff. That's bringing out our nature. And when do you get the chance to express that? So we got to look to these crisis moments as opportunities to bring that out in people, that sleeping giant of goodness and goodwill, right?
What a great analogy that is. I love that. I'm actually going to start using that, and credit you, of course, but that's a really great way to put that. It's a way everybody can relate to that community coming together for something, and like you said,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people are not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And I do want to move on from this topic because I know
Yeah.
the common law stuff I'm excited about. But before I do, I just had one more question regarding this topic in the book.
Mm-hmm.
You had mentioned going on Sean Atwood's podcast. You're obviously on my podcast, and you're no stranger to doing publications and podcasts and media. You've been doing it for a long time. Some people are now just starting to want to do more speaking out, whether it's their own story or educating on what they've learned from people like you or the guests that I've had on this show. How have you navigated that to where you've been able to do that safely and not get in the hands of people who, maybe want to use the opportunity to discredit you or
Mm.
to gaslight you? How have you navigated disclosure? I know that that's also obviously a big part of something you've done very successfully. So I wanted to pick your brain on any advice that you had for people looking to go to these platforms and kind of how you've dealt with doing that in a successful way.
Well, in recent years, it hasn't happened. Like I say, smear campaigns work against you. They say, okay, this is not working. Stop giving the guy exposure. Like, P.T. Barnum, who created Barnum and Bailey Circus, he said, I don't care what you say about me, just don't spell my name wrong, which means any attack on you is good publicity. More people, oh, I didn't know about this, Kevin, even though when you're attacking the guys. So they don't want to give you too much publicity. So I've had few of these recently, but people who first encounter that, your first reaction is to act very defensive and say, no, what you're saying isn't true. This is really what happened. And so it's designed to make you look paranoid and defensive. It's all about image, right? And whenever that happened to me, I stayed totally calm. And like Noam Chomsky, I said, well, let's see the evidence. All these people are against me. Who are you talking about? When? What instance are you referring to? And then that flusters them because they can't produce anything because it's all a big lie. On some occasions, there was one really bad incident where the guy was on there just to destroy me. And after about 5 minutes, I said, look, I'm not participating in this. This is a forum to try to attack me. You don't care anything about the issue. Goodbye. I just left, right? Act on your terms all the time. Don't think you have to always be on their terms, because when you're on an interview, you are on the terrain of another person. And you've got to, if that happens, direct it constantly to the issue. Stand on the hard evidence you have and on the issue itself. Appeal to heart and mind, right? And always do that. And don't get drawn into the questions they have if you see them going in the wrong direction. But ultimately, be your own media. I mean, have your own productions. We had to do that because the mainstream corporate media were just hostile from the beginning and portrayed me, in all sorts of bad ways. So we just never contacted them anymore. We just used our own alternative media network to get this out. And it's amazingly effective when you do the grassroots approach, right? Like you're doing, right?
100%. Thank you for that. It's awesome to get to, learn from you, somebody who has navigated the ups, the downs, the goods, the bads, and everything in between, and to sort of see how you did it and how you're still standing on the other side and with a smile even. So hopefully I hope other people find encouragement from that because I know there are so many more ways now that we can use our voice, whether it's going on somebody else's podcast, creating our own blog, doing our own podcast, having some sort of contribution. But it can be really scary. Again, sometimes we can stop before we even start because of the possible repercussions or just not feeling safe and knowing sort of how to navigate that. So, again, the book that Kevin's referring to is on his website. If you want to hold that up again, Kevin, please go buy this book, you guys. It's awesome. Manual for Whistleblowers and Hellraisers. I think a lot of us that watch this show, that support this content, if you're a survivor who might be thinking about speaking out and you're kind of going against all of the different conditioning that you've had that was negative, empower yourself, grab a book that is helping you share and that's giving you positive encouragement to go forward because as you see with Kevin, there can be a life on the other side of that. It doesn't have to be all bad, and anything bad that does come in your tracks, you can overcome it, and he gives you all those tools to do that in that book. So thank you for presenting all of that, Kevin, and for creating that book. I think it's going to be a really helpful tool now, and I think even more so, it's going to continue growing in popularity in the future too.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it's a practical tool. That's the important thing, right?
100%. And so we do have some other topics to talk about today, and I thought it would be kind of interesting to discuss sort of the common law, the jurisdiction, the sovereignty that you speak about, these different things pertaining to taking action and having solutions to this. Possibly, maybe if you'd be okay with it, I think it'd be interesting to hear from the perspective of you sharing this information and educating us on these things, maybe using the example of how you were able to get that penetration through all the way up to the Vatican to get changes
Mm.
made with Pope Benedict, because you did a lot of what you're going to be talking about today, in your own life. It's not just you reading a book and reciting words. You're
Mm.
speaking from your own practical experience, which I think is really amazing.
Yeah, well, I mean, we tried to summarize the steps you take in that book, the other manual, the Common Law Training Manual. This is until recently, this was the most popular book. We were selling them hundreds of them all over the planet, and
Wow.
um, it helped form common law courts in at least four other countries. It's been translated into five languages, so I mean, it's really gotten out there. Really, what it is a compilation of an experience we had over more than a quarter century in Canada. And that is, like anybody, when we found all this damning evidence, we tried to go through the existing court system, just like Native people were trying to do to get justice. And right away, we found it was totally rigged because, for example, the courts in Canada said, rule time and again, they cannot accuse the crown and churches of genocide because they're set up by the crown. And churches, we learned in practice, have their own jurisdiction. They have their law unto themselves. They can even kill children and traffic them, and they're never touched. Right. So it closed the door on the existing legal system for us. So we didn't give up. We said, okay, what do we have to do now? And then we began to study international law and traditional common law, which, you know, America really grew out of. And that is the idea that people not only can govern themselves, they can control the courts. And, they can determine justice themselves. That's what's behind the jury system. 12 citizens get to decide not only a verdict on a case, They can even rewrite the law and overturn judges' decisions in theory. Now, often that doesn't happen, but um, it's there in the Constitution, U.S. Constitution. And so we said, we drew those examples, and we said, okay, what we need is we need to form our own, first a tribunal to kind of gather the evidence and then create this court. And that's what we did in Europe. This is after 15 years of doing the struggle in Canada. And after I got, you see, the Canadian government brought in this spin on the whole residential school, and their control narrative on the whole thing that de-emphasized all the crime and everything, never talked about genocide. And after that, I was totally swabbed from the Canadian media. My name never mentioned again. When it came up, they referred to me as a controversial former minister from the West Coast, right? So the word controversial in Canada, it's more of a good thing in the States. People don't mind controversy as much, but in Canada, it's a kiss of death. Be controversial, might upset and divide people. So I was blacked out. But when I went over to Europe and we set up this tribunal, it was the opposite. It triggered a real response. And what we did out of the tribunal, we set up this first common law court case against defendants who I call the Dirty 30. There were 30 defendants we call, including Queen Elizabeth, head of state of Canada, and Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, who were the two main defendants, along with a lot of their flunkies. And we operated like a normal court. And in here, there's 12 steps about how to set up a common law court. For example, if you wanted to bring a case against somebody, you post publicly what's called a statement of claim, where you say, I was damaged by, you do a point form, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I was damaged by this person. Here's the offense, here are the details, here's what I want. Basically, you sum up the statement. Then you put out a call for people to volunteer for jurors. You set up somebody with some legal background who can be a magistrate, not a judge, because a judge has too much power in today's world. They can rewrite court transcripts, they can dismiss juries. In common law, they don't have that power. It's the jury that has the power. A magistrate is there to just give legal advice. And if you're bringing a case, you often act as your own prosecutor, which we had a public prosecutor in Europe, like in this coming case against Pope Leo, Robert Prevost, the American. I'm an assistant to the prosecutor. I'm providing him evidence in that. So the prosecutor will present the case, but first you summon people, you issue summonses. And it's a great process because it's a win-win situation. And we found this in the first case. None of them responded. They didn't dare respond because they knew it was true. They didn't want to come into our court and give it legitimacy, so they just ignored us. Now, under the law, when I say something about you in public and you never respond, you're agreeing with it. You're not contesting what's being said about you. And under the law, that's interpreted as that you have silence means consent. You're not challenging it. And we repeated that 3 times and never responded. So often in a court of law, you can then win your case immediately. They can be found guilty because they're not contesting anything you're saying, right? That's happening often in court cases when people don't plea. But we went ahead anyway and proved the case. It took 5 months and it was all out there. We put all the evidence out. And like I say, Pope Benedict resigns, plus 3 other cardinals named in our indictment. They all stepped down from office. Now that was immediately kind of fogged over by the corporate media when it got out, right? Because they don't want people to know they have the power to do that, force out heads of the oldest corporation on the planet, right? And people kept wondering, how do we do that? How did David bring down Goliath like that, right? And it was all through knowing the law, like Sun Tzu says, know your enemy, know yourself, act on it, and you get incredible results. And we found that on other issues too, not on just what happens to children and genocide and that, but on any civil or criminal matter, people can bring about the result that way. But we're not taught to think that we're in charge. We're always taught to think somebody else is in charge, right? But I always remember that quote from Thomas Paine, who wrote Common Sense during the American Revolution. And he said, democracy is not choosing your own masters, but having none. So in other words, governing yourself. not through a representative who you never hear from, but yourself. And that's a long process of education, but the education happens really quick in a real situation. Like we had to learn quick how to do this because our lives were at stake. And that's why, just in closing on that, there's a real difference between doing something out of a good intention and doing something because your life depends on it. Because in a good intention, you can always leave. You can switch to another issue. You have options, right? When our lives are on the line, as they are and were, you have to come up with these solutions, right? And it's like Sun Tzu says, never force an enemy into a corner, then they fight harder because they know they're going to die. That was what the state did with me. They forced me into a corner. So I said, fine, gloves are off, let's go for it, right? And that's a natural human reaction. I think even people who are afraid have that reaction when they know their backs are to the wall. And I think in this day and age, a lot more people are realizing that with the things happening in the world, that our backs are to the wall and we have to take action and govern ourselves and use these methods that I've been talking about.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Another view that you shared that I think is really interesting that I'd love if you could touch on is you argue that common law predates and supersedes statutory law. And then you also relate it to how it's rooted in natural law, which I think is like a really neat comparison. I thought maybe you could explain a little bit about that to the audience who might be new to some of that information that you've shared.
Yeah, well, okay, so law is universal. It's like the law of nature, things that are common sense, like you don't go around and kill somebody, right? You take care of your children. I mean, and that's embodied in laws, right? A statute is a rule the government brings in, usually to make money or to govern people. But even the U.S. Supreme Court, on numerous occasions, it was Oliver Wendell Holmes, who was a Supreme Court justice back in the 1920s, said statute without consent is not law. So, in other words, very powerful within the American tradition. There are these powerful statements, right, upholding human liberty, and it says the government can bring in any statute they want. If you don't agree and you're not harming anybody, it doesn't govern you. You can step out of statute anytime you like, right? So, that's really powerful because most of how we're, quote, governed is through statute. And when you realize that doesn't necessarily govern you, then it opens the door to tremendous possibilities, right? And that it's all rooted in natural law. People are meant to live together in harmony, equally, share the earth, and help each other. And the old saying in common law goes back many centuries: the law does harm to no one. So if the law is doing harm to somebody, it's being used by somebody as a club against somebody else, and that's not the purpose of law. It's to create harmony and justice within the community when it's not there, especially, and help people do the right thing. You know, that's in that book there. That's one of the reasons I wrote it. It looks into natural law when they talk about spiritual sovereignty, and it's the natural way people govern each other, and like govern themselves with each other. Another word for it traditionally is customary law. What are the customs people have among each other? I mean, that's a form of law. So I mean, it can take many forms, but it's all rooted in that idea that we're not to make each other's life worse. We're to make it better, right? And the law should embody that. And if it doesn't, it's not the law. It's a power over people. It's oppression and tyranny. And you know what you guys did in America when you faced tyranny back in the 1700s, right? You have the right to do, and that idea, you have the right to revolt. John Knox, who helped found the Reformation in Scotland, he said, resistance to tyranny is obedience to God. The idea that it's beautiful, right? Like when we're saying, tyranny is not a natural condition, it goes against natural law. Therefore, we have the right to overthrow tyranny, take action against these things, right? That's one of our inherent rights, either as an American or any free soul, right?
Absolutely. And sort of piggybacking off of that, you do speak about independent common law courts, and you're an advocate for that. And it's exemplified in your own testimony how you co-founded the ITCCS in 2010 to help prosecute crimes by church and state. And you actually were able to use the ITCCS in your case against Pope Benedict and the case that you had just talked about. And you've referenced that it obviously contributed to the Pope's resignation. I wanted you to talk a little bit about independent common law courts and your
Mhm.
your organization, the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State, and sort of how you came up with that, maybe some tips on how other people can sort of follow in your footsteps and how you came to the conclusion that that was the best way for you to take on this case.
Well, like I said, it grew out of our first in our situation in Canada and how the door was closed to us by the existing court system. And we followed pretty much what I described just now in the procedure for setting up a common law court. We just went ahead and did it. But the way it started, the ITCCS, was I got invited right at the same time, like the door closed in Canada, it opened up somewhere else. And in Ireland, I got invited. I was actually visiting relatives, but when they heard I was over there, and the survivors of Catholic Church crimes, children who'd been raped and experimented on medically when they were kids in Catholic hospitals and that, they were looking for a way to go beyond the courts who were blocking them in Ireland as well. And they heard about my work. They invited me over. And we were sitting there in Dublin in a community center. And I said to them, the stories you're telling me about what happened to you could be spoken by Native people in Canada. It's exactly the same crime, the same cover up, the same institution, this global corporation called the Church of Rome. So we need to be united across borders as well. And we say, good, these we'll create this tribunal. And quickly we had support in like people in 9 other countries for this thing. And that's what the common law court that tried Ratzinger grew out of. Because this tribunal established the court, invited in a few well-known jurists, although they didn't make that fact public. There was a Spanish judge, Baltasar Garzon, his name was, and he had been booted out of Spain off the bench as a judge because he had tried to take on the Catholic Church over how they trafficked children during the Franco dictatorship in the 1930s and 40s. They would take children of political prisoners that Franco had locked up and take their children and raise them, give them false identities, raise them in loyal fascist homes, Catholic homes. And I met with some of these people in Barcelona when they were adults, and they didn't even know their parents. They didn't know where they came from. The Catholic Church did that all over the world, just trafficked children. Bergoglio, Pope Francis, did that in Argentina with the military junta, the same thing, right? So, I mean, we had a commonality there. I mean, okay, these judges were clear that we had the ground to prosecute the church with. It's just that the governments, didn't want to help them, so we had to go on our own. And we operated the court just like any other court does. Due process. We legal procedure. We sent out the summons. We gave them the chance to even nominate the jury. We had a jury of 57 people linked around the world, citizen jury, people volunteered. But in the jury selection process, like you see in movies, both sides get to choose the jurors. And you have examination where you sit down, plaintiff and defendant, and you look at all the evidence and try to work out an agreement so you don't have to go to trial. We offered them all that, but they all refused. So we then proceeded, like I said, with that trial that brought out all this stuff. And so that was kind of, in general, what led us to do that. And the good thing, too, is we were able to do it because, A, we had tons of evidence from Canada and all over the world, people coming forward with all this stuff, and not just their own word on this, but documents and film and forensic evidence of these graves and all this stuff. So the evidence was all on our side, and even the corporate media hadn't been totally shut down at that point. They were occasionally reporting these things, and some dramatic things happened, like when I did that exorcism in St. Peter's Square in Rome, right? That following week, the media were reporting everything about Ratzinger and sending out letters to bishops to conceal trafficking and killing of children and all that. All of that just converged, boom, and it helped force the case. So circumstances have to be on your side to some degree, but you need evidence. And you in a common law court, evidence has to be backed up by somebody willing to come into court to confirm it. So you need witnesses to come forward and say, yeah, I saw this happen. It can't go on hearsay, like, I heard this, like the way smear campaigns work, like, I hear this about Kevin, right? No, it's got to be real evidence, somebody can attest to. And we had all that. And that's what made our example so powerful, that we succeeded in forcing these guys out. And, after that, Emma, within 5 years of that, all over the world, you saw online and everywhere these common law groups emerging, common law education groups starting. It was all inspired by our success in the real world, right? And that shows you the power of setting an example in the real world. And it wasn't a cyber reality; it had happened, right? And so that people got, it was enormous catalyst all over the world. And that's the importance of doing these things, that you empower and activate all these people you'll never meet, but they're out there, right? And just that's why it's important to always stay at this stuff, right?
Absolutely, it is. And it's really amazing that you were able to navigate that and sort of pave the way. And I'm sure you were thinking, why is nobody else doing this, you know? And so it's neat that you were able to spawn so many other people to come to that conclusion that, hey, I can do this too. And look, Kevin had success with it. I can also. And it's really
Mm-hmm.
neat that you've, not just learned about this, but you've established all these different ways to tackle the system and alternative ways that are legal and lawful, and like you said, rooted in natural law at the end of the day. And it's awesome. And hopefully again that this can keep trickling on generation after generation. I think your work is going to live on for so long, and we still, are just at the tip of the iceberg of how this is going to impact people in the future to go about getting justice and to whistleblow and to take these measures to use the court system in a way that's going to be beneficial to them. And something else that you have done, you established the Republic of Canada in 2015 as a sovereign jurisdiction, and I wanted you to
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit about sovereign jurisdictions and your project, the Republic of Canada as well, and how you've been able to use that as well for these victims, survivors, and for your mission.
Right. And, that's, like I said at the beginning of the show, creating your own jurisdiction to operate from is the only way to prosecute these cases, and to allow the independents, including independents here, to say, okay, I'm not part of the system. I'm not bound to it. We can prosecute it, And so this book sums it up. This is the book kind of describing the vision and the program of the Constitution of the Republic. A little background. Well, first of all, the flag. Uh, these are the founding nations of Canada: the English, the French, and the Indigenous people. And the blue lines are called the Turo Wampum, which was the first treaty signed between the Europeans and the Eastern Woodlands tribes. These are like the Iroquois, the Mohawk, the Seneca, people like that. And it said, these two lines represent the Europeans and the Indigenous. We will go down the river side by side. You in your ship, we in our canoe, and we'll share the land together. So it's a symbol, it's a very powerful spiritual symbol too, of the oneness and equality of all people, and how we have to not be above each other, right? And so that's kind of part of the vision, because when we had our founding convention, it was in Winnipeg in central Canada, where I grew up. And about a third of the delegates, there were 220 some odd delegates from all around who wanted to set up this republic, and about a third of them were native, and they are the ones who said we need the Tura Wampum, in the flag, because we need a new deal among all. You see, right now in Canada, it's a colonial arrangement. All native people are wards of the state; they're not citizens, so they can be killed legally, and there's no legal consequence. Right? They're like children under the law, and it's under this thing called the Indian Act, which is illegal under international law. You can't have legislation targeted at a group. Like, do you have an Irish Act? All Irish people have to act this way, right? Or an Italian Act. But you have an Indian Act in Canada, and it said you're on reservations, which are like concentration camps. So you got to do away with that whole colonial arrangement, and that was the whole point of the Republic. But also because Queen Elizabeth had been found guilty. She's a convicted felon, and a head of state who's a convicted felon has no more authority. It created a political vacuum, and we filled it with the Republic, the idea. So the thing we're always saying to people is, this isn't just a nice idea. This is a living reality. We set up, first thing we do when people sign a citizenship card, you help form a local assembly of 12 or more people. You sign a charter and you say, we're now a legislative assembly. We can pass our laws. You invite everybody in, and I've been to these things. They're incredibly empowering. You have a community hall or a library, you invite in the community. You say, okay, we're going to debate what kind of laws we want in our neighborhoods now. How do we want it to run? What do we want? And we pass and enforce our own laws. The enforcement is the difficult part because people are not used to doing that. But one of the ways we do that is we go to the police and we invite them in and educate them and say, disavow your oath of allegiance to the king in London. Because that's all, every member of parliament, every judge, every civil servant, cop, soldier, they all take the same oath of allegiance to one man, not to a constitution. I mean, Americans look at that and say, what the hell? Like, what's going on here? Your allegiance to one individual? Like, what is that? That's, oligarchy. But so we say disavow that, and cops have done that. They said okay, and they become citizens. And so it's this beautiful grassroots kind of movement that's developing everywhere. In the last opinion poll, about 58% of Canadians want a republic. So we got a majority mandate from the people, right? And we just keep working at it, setting up our own courts. We've done things like when some of the extreme COVID measures came in around 2020, we passed local laws saying, no, it's up to the people to decide if they want these measures. They nullified, things that people didn't like. We seized Crown land. We've nullified federal taxes and kept the taxes in the community. All this stuff is happening. Now, sometimes people fall away, sometimes assemblies collapse, but the idea is out there like a virus in the system, right? And it's spreading. And so it all comes out of that same notion of sovereignty and, originally because we needed to put these criminals of church and state on trial, but now it's got a life of its own and people are realizing the way the state of the world is, and government's increasingly corporatized and indifferent and criminal, we need to reestablish our republics on the ground. And we actually now are part of a thing called the Republic Alliance. It's got groups in, I think it's at least over a dozen, I've lost track, a dozen countries who are working to establish those same republics. And including in countries that don't have a common law tradition. Russia. There's people in Russia trying to do that, right? But the underlying common idea is natural law. People are born inherently sovereign and good, and we can govern ourselves and work together in our own communities to do that, right?
Right. Now, in you doing this, I'm sure, obviously, there's so many benefits to it, and you have had great success doing it. What were some of the challenges or obstacles that you faced going about it this way? If other people were going to try this, what are some pitfalls maybe to expect, and how did you overcome those?
Well, there are two things that got in the way. First of all, there was overt sabotage by the government. Like on Vancouver Island on the West Coast, I helped set up 6 different assemblies in small towns all over the island. Within less than 6 months, they were all gone because China is moving in a big way there, as we've talked about. They're grabbing up all the natural resources on the West Coast and in the North, the oil and gas. And the RCMP and Chinese operatives sent people in to disrupt, using the classic black operations tactic, spreading rumors about me and and undermining and threatening, saying if you pass these laws, you're going to get arrested by the Mounties. So it disrupted it. But that was a special case in a way, because across the country, whenever we had problems, it wasn't really because of that. It was because people didn't believe in themselves. And the other problem is, if you have an assembly of people right away who don't know each other, if you have 30 people there, you're going to have 30 different levels of commitment, of awareness. And it was like, if you have too many people together at first, it's like herding cats. It's just impossible. So the way, in a practical sense, what we do on the ground is we don't start with an assembly right away. Unless you know 12 people who know each other and are willing to go, that's great. But normally it's 1, 2, 3 people in a community. So you form a little cell. We form Republic cell groups. And they start educating. Each person in the cell is set to recruit 3 other people. And once they do that, you've got 12. But you can control the process. You can gradually screen people and educate them and get them on board over a period of time. Then you form an assembly, and then it has a more solid foundation. So that's kind of one tactic to use to avoid the pitfall of them just exploding. And that tended to happen. Some people were there just to learn, if you call all these people together, some are there to learn, some are there just to watch, some really want to do stuff, and they're frustrated by being held back by everybody else's, caution. And so it tends to splinter. But that's why, like in churches, when I was training for the ministry, they said there's no such thing as a congregation. There's what they call affinity groups. All these little affinity groups that are in any group. You naturally congregate if you're an older person, or maybe you're there to work in the nursery with other young moms, or whatever. Or some people just want Bible study. So you learn to bring all these affinity groups together with a common vision and a common meeting every week in the service. And that you do that in the community as well. You have a common ground of vision and principles, and we all want this republic. We want to sever ties with the crown. But then you work on certain areas. Like I can tell you, the two big areas that people in the republic work on are education and health. So parents often say, "I want to get my kids out of the school system and all the brainwashing going on," right? So we get teachers and parents together, and they set up their own curriculum, and they start their own school. Just like you get health professionals to come and give free health care and naturopathic techniques. We form community gardens. It's really important to have farmers on board, so you have a food base and a land base to operate from. We try to encourage those local communities, get the kids out of the city and back into healthy relationships with the land and each other. I mean, that's some of the healthier things going on. So, I mean, all of that is learning from experience. We couldn't have foreseen that. As a matter of fact, when at our first convention, we had optimistic idea that within 10 years, we're going to be this big force. It hasn't worked out that way, but we've gained a lot of wisdom about how you go about it. And that's, for the next generation, that's really important, because then they can see clearer. Things are never done quickly. Our children and grandchildren are going to be involved in this. And we need the long view and say, we need a body of wisdom and understanding so that the path is stronger for our children and our grandchildren. And it's funny because John Adams and some of the founding fathers of America spoke in those terms, that, we're just laying the framework for America to evolve. America is going to be more than what we're doing now, including having slaves, right? But trusting that people will evolve and grow, with the right inspiration. And you have to have that trust. Otherwise you're a control freak, and you have to control everybody and have a blueprint and say, yeah, you've got to do it this way, or my way or the highway. And that never leads anywhere. So anyway, that's our republic and our allies, right?
You mentioned the school system and some advice on people who were maybe trying to get out of that, people that they should recruit and have on their side. For people who are interested, if they're survivors, victims, if they're advocates, want to get people together, are there some key people that you would recommend, or people in certain careers that you would advise people going after predators to reach out to be on their team?
Individuals' names don't come to mind at the moment, but they're out there, and I could, provide that to you later. But there's great educators that write on stuff, about how education is lifelong and is based in the world. It isn't based in a classroom. It's not. And the trouble with our technology now is it reduces knowledge to information, and knowledge is not information. It's, our minds are complex. There's emotional intelligence, intuitive intelligence, and we have to get away from a fact information-based culture back into the natural wisdom that children have inherently, right? And that's kind of in terms of teaching, and that not just the curriculum, but the whole way we understand learning is really important to kind of get back to basics again about, our place in the universe and in relation to all the nations in creation, all the animals and living things, our place on the planet, all of that. And so it's a really rich thing to do, to talk about, what would education geared to human beings look like, and how we raise children, right? And how children really raise themselves, but they need to have a lot of the impediments taken away so they can fully blossom, right? I mean, I learned that when I had my two daughters, just watching them every day, right? I was learning from them all the time, right? So, yeah, it's beautiful. So that aspect, and in terms of resources. Like I said, people working in this area. There's so many people out there doing these things. Like I come across them all the time. They don't have the big vision, but they know in their community they got to start taking back education and start ensuring health for each other. And just if anything, it'll the need to this will increase in the future because things are going to get worse before they get better. And that tends to be what happens, in a really a global culture now facing instability and crisis. I mean, we need to create these local alternatives. If the system and when the system collapses, that's all you'll have, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And one thing that you mentioned just a little bit ago was having evidence and proof to present. Obviously, a lot of child abuse survivors may not be able to testify till they're adults for
Mm-hmm.
various reasons. One being they might not even remember until they're an adult. They might not have memory of even being abused.
Yeah.
What in your experiences qualifies as evidence, whether it's an individual or a group? Can testimony alone, if people have overlapping testimony, is that evidence by itself? What types of things should people prepare for court and for trying to get justice for what they went through?
Well, it's difficult in an existing court system because there's a whole system built up to discredit survivors. The lawyers for churches and government have a thing called false memory syndrome, where they say if you're under a lot of trauma and stress, your memories can't be relied on. Well, that's just a device, like lowering the age of consent, which the Catholic Church is always doing. So there is no age of consent. So you can harm a child and it isn't a crime. All of that stuff, the legal games. So don't expect justice in the existing system. You'll face incredible roadblocks and attacks and grief when you do that. That's why we emphasize the common law court route, right? And going public, the smaller you are, the louder you got to be, right? Just broadcast your case all over the world, and you'll find other people coming to you, other allies, other people who've been through what you've been through, right? Rely on those grassroots methods. But in terms of like the validity of your own testimony, courts, even in Canada, where courts are so controlled, they've said time and again, oral testimony is as valid as written or documentation in a court of law. You swear. I mean, otherwise you wouldn't have oaths. You wouldn't have an oath somebody takes unless it was believed that that oath is valid, right? Your word is valid. Okay. So as much as they try to fog that and discredit that idea, it's still true under law that, yeah, you give testimony and it stands as fact unless somebody can refute it with hard evidence. And that's the importance of telling your story because it not only establishes as fact under the law, but it's incredibly freeing, right? And we got this from survivors from these native death camps all the time. Like I had a radio show in Vancouver for 9 years until the government shut it down. It's called Hidden from History. And every week, it was right on the street where a lot of Native people were sleeping out. I said, come into the studio, tell your story. This is how we begin to learn these things. And all of them said the same thing. After I told my story, it's like a weight had gone off. And I wasn't afraid of them anymore. And I realized I found my voice. And that's the first thing they take from you when you're harmed. Your voice. Shh. Silence. Right? And that's the horrible thing about legal settlements is they gag you. When the Native people got money for compensation from the government, it always went with a gag order where you couldn't talk about what happened anymore. And that's why a lot of Native people refused it. They said, I'm going to always tell about what happened to me. That's part of our recovery, to be able to name names, name what happened, name who did it, say, I'm moving on, I'm rising above this, right? We often don't talk about healing, which might have the connotation of going back to where you were, which usually isn't possible, right? We talk about transformation, right? Rising above, like dropping off the old skin and becoming more than who we were. We're not a victim anymore. We own ourselves. We're like one Native woman said, I'm not a victim anymore. I'm a threat. A threat to these guys. You got to stop them so they don't do it to other children, right? And that's so beautiful. When people find that, it's the best. Beautiful anecdote about that. There was a Native woman, Maggie, and she worked in our movement. She lived on the street all the time and didn't have a home. And One night, one of our members was arrested by the police, a young guy called Trevor. The Vancouver police took him in, and a bunch of us heard about him. We spontaneously gathered on Main Street in the middle of the night outside the cop shop. And normally, half the time, Maggie was passed out, on the street from various inebriants and that. And I look around, and there's Maggie. She's dragging a police barrier across the street, and there's a group, they call the riot cops. There's a group of riot police across the street, ready with their clubs to break heads. Maggie is cursing them to their face, dragging a police barrier to block off traffic, and saying, "Free Trevor, let Trevor out." Like she got activated. And I know one of the reasons she was, and she said this later when we're all talking after they let Trevor out after an hour, when they saw what was happening, they just let him free, right? And we all cheered and we were hugging each other and that. But after Maggie said, I'm able to do that because in our talking circles, I talked about that priest who did that, who raped me and tortured me like that. I knew if I could stand up to them, these cops are nothing. What are they? They're a bunch of hired thugs. And so that in one moment, even though she had other problems in her life, that golden part of ourselves that's able to rise up all the shit done to us, right? It was there. And that's victory. To me, that was a victory greater than almost anything I saw at that time. So
That's so beautiful. I had a
yeah.
podcast guest, and I'll never forget this line that she said, and so many people commented on it. She had said about her abusers and being an adult now and seeing them in the street. And she said, "Why would I be scared of them?" She's like, "It's like they created a really fucking sharp weapon, and now it's pointed at them. Like I would now, he'd be scared of me if he saw me in the streets. It wouldn't be the other way around, like I was a kid scared of him." And I was like, "Yes, girl, it's so
Oh
great."
yeah. That
It's
is
really
beautiful.
it's so
I,
powerful seeing these victims take that stance and become confident in who they are, and you're right, sharing testimony really does
yeah.
lift that weight off and it reclaims your power back.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And that's like a metaphor for how we view the whole society and the system. You can say the same thing to power, so-called power authorities who are criminal. We don't have to obey them. We don't have to go along with them. We turn the tables and put them on trial and replace their system, right? That's what we're trying to do in the grassroots, right?
Right, exactly. And, from all of us, we can't thank you enough for all your work that you've put in to help get victims justice, to help them feel heard, and to give them their voice back. I know justice isn't something a lot of people experience, but even just having a safe person to share their story to have somebody believe them, it's so crucial in somebody's journey. And so I wanted to ask you along those lines, what are some of the ways that speaking out has changed your life in a good way?
It kept me alive because it was being true to my nature. I knew what was right. If I'd have gone along with the church and helped cover up their lie, I would have been a dead soul. Like a lot of other ministers, I see this. They're dead souls because they play along for their pension. They play along with wrong and crime, and they lose themselves. But the fact that I was able to hold on to myself and inspire others, that gave me encouragement every day, and it was stronger, not at first, but it became stronger than my horrible pain of losing my children and all the other garbage being thrown. It overcame that. I rose above it, and I was able to inspire others, including my daughters, with that. Right, help them navigate the situation they were in, and so it was that, and it was a will, and a realization that I was living for something greater than myself. And when you do that, when you're living for that cause every day, the things that happen to you, the bad things, don't have the same weight because if you're sitting in the room, a little room of your own head, in your own life, it drives you crazy because we aren't meant to be like that. We're meant to be out there in the world. We're social beings. We're supposed to be with each other and do the right thing and help each other, right? And every day I did that. Okay, so whatever. I was broke and living on my car. It didn't matter because so was everybody else I was working with, right? And so it's seeing that bigger picture and knowing your place in it, and that's the real power, the real gift given to people who go through this fight and stay at it, right?
Yeah, and it's really wonderful, again, that in hindsight you can say these things. I think it'll give a lot of encouragement and hope to others who are sort of in the thick of it or battling those smear campaigns,
Yeah,
battling that fear of even just wanting to speak out. it's
Yeah.
so wonderful to see positive examples of somebody overcoming all of that, and that there can be justice that can be had. There are solutions. There are ways that one person can make a huge impact. And there's so many more of us now speaking out, so many more ways that we can connect, and so many more ways that we don't have to be alone and isolated on this journey anymore, that we can combine and collaborate with like-minded people, find other people on the same mission as us so much easier than you were able to 30 years ago, without all these different social media sites and podcasts. And it's really a wonderful time to form those communities like how you preach, locally and
Mhm.
even, across your country, like how we were just saying, with being able to do outreach on a podcast or online and gather information and community from people all over the place. Doesn't even have to just be locally now, but it's really powerful, all the tools that you've been able to put together and compile for us to be able to help these grassroots movements form and be
Yeah.
successful in their journey with knowing what to expect, knowing how to overcome it, and ultimately be able to see what's on the other side of that.
Right. Yeah, and that the way we do interviews is great, Emma. It gets down to the brass tacks, and it does in a very human way, thanks to your questions and the whole atmosphere you set. So it's I thank you for that, because I know this interview in particular can be a great tool that I can use as well with people who, like you say, are just getting into this fight and have their own burdens and that. So we can use this well, like our future interviews.
Absolutely. And I can't wait to do more with you. There's so many things that we can talk about and so much work that you've done and uncovered and put together and so many lessons that you've learned.
Yeah.
Was there anything else regarding the common law, regarding sovereign jurisdiction, or anything that we talked about today that you wanted to expand on or talk about?
I think that's a really good intro for now, and we can get into more details in that. But I think this is a good. We've covered a lot, and so I think we can
In which books,
rest on our
or just these
folks.
topics that we talked about today? You showed the Whistleblower's Manual. What other books out of your vast collection of books would you recommend for people to, including the one that you've shown? Is there other ones that you'd recommend people dive into to learn more about this?
Well, besides all the ones I've shown,
And you
uh,
can re-show those
one.
again to remind people too.
Oh yeah, okay, okay. Well, Common Law Training Manual, Establishing the Reign of Natural Liberty. These are all on Amazon, or you can get from me, and I guess you've got my contact info up there. Um, Whistleblower Manual. This is our most recent one where we look at the bigger picture of spiritual, personal, political sovereignty, what it is, how to achieve it. I mean, it's natural in us, but how to revive it. Um, if you know folks in Canada, the Case for Canada, Establishing Liberty. As a matter of fact, a group of people in England have just launched their own republic based on this book. So I just was into conversation with them today about that. So it was really great. I would also recommend a recent biography I wrote about myself, Unrelenting, um, My Life as a Whistleblower. No, my Life as a Truth Teller. That's online as well. And it gives you more of the personal story, because you can, like stuff like this, my Crimes Against Humanity, it tells about how they went after me and also about other witnesses to bury the crime. And, but biography for me, the way I read it, is much more personal, and the anecdotes and the heartbreak and the victories and all that thrown together. So that as well, I think would be good.
Awesome. And where can people get your books? You had mentioned on your website. Why don't we show that and you can walk people through your website, any other work that you have done that you want to talk about, and obviously other places that people can connect and learn about you online.
Murderbydecree.com. That's the basic one. The site for the Republic is republicofcanada.org. But this one, Murder by Decree, is kind of the basic one. You can not only download the entire book there with all the hard evidence on genocide in Canada, it has a list of my other books, or a lot of them at least. I do a blog radio first and third Sunday of every month. Um, and what else? A lot of things, just kind of a lot of key evidence you need. So yeah, I mean it's all on there. Just do a thorough study and you'll learn a lot.
And then your radio show, that is at bbsradio.com/Radio Free Canada.
That's right. And the
And
next one
then
is on the 18th, and it's first and third Sunday of the month. Um, and that's the Republic website with a lot of nuts and bolts stuff about how we set up the Republic, the things I talked about, the cell groups, the vision of the Republic, and all that.
And you do have a contact us tab on here. Last time you were gracious enough to give out your phone number and your email.
Mhm.
Did you want to mention those? I'll have them in the show notes for people to go down and
Yeah,
copy and paste and look. But if you want to share how people can directly get in contact with you, feel free to.
yeah. The email is angelfire101 at protonmail.com. You can also write to hidden from history one, like the number one, hidden from history one at gmail.com. And my phone number is 289 680 8724.
Thank you for that. And then I would also recommend for you guys, if you guys want to get to know Kevin's work a little bit more, he did send, and I do have it in the show notes of the last episode and this one, Kevin's documentary that he did and was highly heralded for. It's a fantastic documentary. It's on YouTube. I'm going to have that linked below. Did you want to share anything about it, Kevin? Just any details or anything like that for people who might have missed last episode?
Well, just looking at that, I forgot I had so much hair once. Um, anyway, that was filmed in 2006. And this film actually opened up the whole issue of genocide in Canada because members of parliament viewed it. They got up and started asking questions. It led to a real opening. We had like a 250,000 hits in less than a month. Native people all over the country, they called it the residential school movie, and people were coming forward. It just was like a match in a room full of dynamite. It just exploded the country when this got out. And it's filmed in a very grainy way, like basic. Starts with eyewitnesses telling their story and how what happened to me was all part of it, right? And what I'll give you an example of the power of this. When people were describing in the film these horrible tortures that happened to them, I watch audiences as they're watching, especially white audiences, and they didn't react to that because it's so, being tortured with electric prods, it's kind of like outside people's experience. It just seems like odd. But then when the interviewer asked me about how my wife got paid by the church to leave me, everyone gasps. It always happens. They go, oh, because they can relate to it, right? And that was the power of this movie. It wasn't done purportedly by Native people. It was done through the eyes of a white professional man. And so, you know, that meant that in the mainstream culture, it had a lot more legitimacy. They could identify with me, right? And I wouldn't recommend that approach all the time, but in this case, it was like we talked about earlier. All of the events converged at the right moment, boom, and we grabbed the chi of the situation, right? And so that's the power of this film. It's kind of dated now. We want to work on a sequel
Oh,
and
good.
bring in all this stuff, but it's a big job, and we need more help with that. I've scripted feature film. Hollywood actually was going to do a feature film on me. But then it got dropped from pressure or whatever. Sometimes people say, if it's about Canada, no one's going to care, kind of attitude. But we'll see. Hopefully that'll come about because I think that we need to use all the mediums to get this story out, this truth.
Man, that's amazing. Maybe if there's anybody on the other end too who has specialties in cinematography or filmography or anything. I think we can also somewhat have grassroots movements, outside of Hollywood and get together and do some of these things like how you did. Like you said, it's more of like kind of a grainy, raw documentary.
Yeah.
Really neat. And I think it's awesome that you did that. And I definitely encourage people to watch that. But I too hope that your work gets picked up by more and more big platforms and podcasters and, media and film, and I think that that would be a wonderful avenue. You certainly have many years to pick some things from that could make a really, really compelling movie and documentary, and obviously everything that you've learned too in the meantime to be able to go into that. So I ask everybody to pray over that. That'd be wonderful if you got a call, somebody confirming that they can do that for you. And or people, like I said, can reach out to you. I'll have your email, your phone number. There's contact pages on or links and tabs on his websites you guys can go to. I'll have his radio show, documentary, his websites, buy his books, make great gifts for other advocates, for survivors. for people maybe just waking up to this. It can be a really great introduction to some of these things. Kevin makes this information really palatable, really clinical, really easy to digest, and very educational. I think all of his books can be really good tools, and especially the ones that we talked about today, you guys. Again, that whistleblower's manual that we talked about in the beginning, a lot of whistleblowers are not only on the show, but in the audience. Maybe people who want to be a whistleblower or to disclose your story. It can be a really big step. I think it's wonderful that Kevin made an actual manual that we can overcome all the obstacles that put us in fear sometimes and make us want to clam up and be quiet instead of using our voice, reclaiming that power back, and ultimately, you know, getting that weight off your shoulder and helping you be free again and reclaiming that voice that was once taken from you as a child or whatever point in your life that somebody took advantage and exploited you and made you feel like you didn't have a voice, you know? So just thank you, Kevin, from the bottom of my heart and from all of us listening for your continuation to keep going, for all the resources that you've produced for us, for all the work that you do, all the podcasts, just the never-ending hours that you have given to this cause, despite the cost it has cost you, which has literally been everything. You know, thank you for continuing going and for everything that you're doing over there.
Thank you, Emma. It's always good to talk to you.
You too, and I can't wait to do it again. So again, you guys go in the show notes. I'll have his last episode as well. Contact info, connect with me on different platforms. By the time you guys watch this video, my YouTube channel will be all caught up. So I'll have new premieres premiering on that channel. I will have a fully functioning YouTube, all updated with all my past years of episodes finally. So go connect with me over there. I'm going to have that link in the show notes for you guys too if you're on an alternative streaming platform. And just thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. We definitely couldn't do this without you. So thank you guys for listening. God bless you, and we will see you next time.